So, talking to everyone who is here, I can't see all of you, but a very warm welcome to this workshop on refugees and religious tolerance in Europe. My name is Jos Phillips. I'm an assistant professor in political philosophy and ethics at Utrecht University, and I will be doing a short introduction and the chairing, but I'm not one of the speakers, as you will hear in a moment. To start off, maybe I would like to ask every one of you to turn your microphones off and if possible, leave your cameras on, and we can see a little bit who is there and how we are together. A warm welcome, I said, to all of you, and especially warm welcome to the speakers of this afternoon, Izabella mine, Elżbieta Goździak, and Izabela Kujawa from the Center of Migration Studies at Adam Mickiewicz University in Poznan, Poland. So my Polish pronunciation, apologies for that. A very warm welcome to that. In addition to being at this Center for Migration Studies, you're also a part of the Horizon 2020 project, Norms and Values in the European.
You just froze, Jos.
A project about which I shall say a bit more in a moment. Also a very warm welcome to Anneliese Reed, Birgit Meijer and Christoph Baumgartner from the Department of Philosophy and Religious Studies of Utrecht University, who will be doing presentations in the second half of this afternoon. So I'll now go ahead and give a short introduction to the theme and also to the European project of which this workshop is a part. And then we'll have a fast round of presentations, a coffee break as announced around 3:30, and then the second round of presentations at 4 o'clock till 5:30. I'll say a bit more about how these sessions will be structured at the end. So the European project, Norms and Values in the European Migration and Refugee Crisis, with a nice acronym NovaMigra, asks the question how the European Union should react to the arrival of a large number of refugees from 2015 onwards, so especially from Syria, but also from elsewhere, and especially refugees, but sometimes also other migrants. And the basic idea of that project is that this is not just a question that ethicists and legal scholars should answer, but it should be informed by realities on the ground, which means both more top-down realities, if you will. For instance, what is being written in the Charter of Fundamental Rights of the European Union and how the European Union relates to that and embraces that, and also what politicians say and do, both according to themselves and according to other people. But emphatically also realities on the ground are more bottom-up. So they have to do with what is going on in civil society, which can be more populist agents, but also agents such as NGOs and others that welcome refugees. So there's a big variety, of course, of what is going on in civil society, and the intuition of this project is in answering the question how the EU should treat refugees. It should really look at these realities, and the ultimate aim of the project is to come up with what we call a cosmopolitan ideal for the European Union, for Europe. This is a big consortium, mainly composed, as I said, of social scientists like anthropologists and political scientists on the one hand, and philosophers on the other, and a few legal scholars as well. And a wide variety of countries, Greece, Hungary, Italy, Poland, Sweden, Germany, France, and the Netherlands. I hope I forget no Germany, I should say, because the coordinator is coming from Germany. So a wide variety of countries. So that is the context of this workshop from the perspective of this European project. And religion obviously is one very important factor in civil society. There is a rich variety of experiences and actions by various agents going on in how religion plays a role in reacting to refugees and working together, living together with them. One factor that plays a role is that many refugees who arrive in Europe since 2015 have Islam as their religion in one way or another, and that some agents in Europe have sometimes come to conceive of themselves as more Christian, maybe than they were before, in a sometimes quite secularized context, in reacting to the arrival of the refugees. That could be either more welcoming or less so. But this is just one development and one thing that one sees, and there is a rich variety of things going on. And we have invited the speakers of today to tell us something, to reflect on their own research, or to present their findings, just what they think is important and interesting in having to do with religion and the reception of refugees in the European Union. They will all introduce themselves very briefly at the beginning of the session, so I will not say more about them at this point. With that, I think we can turn to the first session, and I will not take up more time from them. Since we have quite a number of participants this afternoon, the discussion that we will have after the presentations will be about 3 times 15 minutes, and then we'll have the rest of the 1.5 hour for discussion. I would ask you to put your questions in the chat already during the presentations. You can do that, and then I will pick out some questions and reformulate them. So that's not the nicest way, obviously, to do it, but with the number of participants that we have, I think it's about the only way that we can do it. So if you have a question, please put it in the chat, and we hope to get to it. I cannot guarantee, of course, that all questions can be discussed, but I hope we can discuss many of them. Yes, with that, let me give the floor to Izabella, who will introduce herself and kick off the session from the researchers from Poland.
Thank you, Jos, for this really nice introduction. And I will just open the presentation. Just a moment. I hope you can see it. So yes, I need to move a little bit here. Yes, as it was mentioned, I am affiliated with the Center for Migration Studies at Adam Mickiewicz University in Poznan, Poland. I am a historian and anthropologist by training. I'm working in the Department for Anthropology and Ethnography. And I think because we have so much to present today, I will not really go on into presenting my research interests, and I think we can you can always check it online. So I would rather go to the presentation, and I will be the first one presenting, and then I will be followed by Elżbieta, Goździak, and Izabella Kujawa. So I will focus on the case of Poland, and I entitled this presentation Local Pro-Refugee Initiatives in a Divided Poland. And the picture you see is documenting a meeting of the Sant Egidio Foundation that I will be mentioning later. So I would like to, let me begin with a few introductory information about religious landscape in Poland and some background information. So the Catholic Church in Poland is in privileged position for a number of reasons. It's first of all the number of Catholics in society, the percentage, high percentage of Catholics, but it's also the historical role of the Catholic Church, especially in the 19th and 20th century, as a supporter of Polish identity and tradition, but it's also its political role, especially in the last decade, and its political alliance with the ruling party of Law and Justice. And last but not least, it's also the legal agreement which is called the Concordat, which has been signed between the Polish state and the Vatican state, which gives several privileges to the Catholic Church in Poland. As a side note, I of course want to mention that there are other Christian denominations in Poland, and sorry, I need to admit someone. And there are also Muslim and Jewish communities that have a long history, but they are significantly smaller. The second point I would like to make is that at the same time, the Catholics in Poland, both the clergy, but also the lay people, are quite diverse. They represent different attitudes, different perspectives about the role of religion, also how it should be understood and practiced. And we could say it's from like open or left, there is no good term, left wing to more traditional, conservative, right or far right. And then in the situation of this refugee crisis, in question marks, this position and proclamation of the clergy were also very ambiguous about the crisis, about the acceptance or not acceptance of refugees. So some bishops expressed supportive and welcoming statements, and others were more reluctant, and some clergymen were openly hostile to the idea of welcoming asylum seekers. The Catholic media, which are mostly dominated by conservative perspective, gave the voice to many anti-refugee proclamations, and especially manipulative statements were addressed against Muslims. Often refugees were linked to terrorism, and particularly the threat of Islam. So just to give you a few examples of this diversity of the statements, some of the bishops like Krzysztof Zadarko, he advocated for the introduction of the humanitarian corridors. He emphasized that meetings with refugees should reveal our humanity, and he stressed that it's a quote, "Today Jesus has a face of a refugee." But at the same time, other bishops, like for example, Archbishop Henryk Kozel, stressed that Muslim refugees would face challenges in understanding and accepting Christian values, and therefore should not be able to integrate into Polish society. So clearly, like the clergymen were divided, also the society, including Catholic lay people, also were very divided around this issue. Finally, the last point, also the government, I think this is clear for most of you, but just to make it even more clear here, is that the government of the Law and Justice was very clearly representing the view that refugees should not be accepted to Poland, and the government refused to admit asylum seekers or to participate in relocation schemes. To move a little bit further, the society at large had very diverse views as well. So more than half of Poland was Polish. During the research, during the public opinion polls, stated that Poland should not admit any refugees. Around 40% agreed that the country should provide some temporary refuge, but then the refugees should go back home, and only around 34% favored permanent resettlement of refugees in Poland. And these debates about accepting or not accepting refugees were very present. And as I already mentioned, were often about also the fact that the refugees were in vast majority Muslim. There was also this view that that Poland should not be accepting Muslim refugees, but the Christian refugees from Middle East should be allowed to settle in Poland. And just to give one example, in Warsaw there has been a Estera Foundation, which was set up to offer support to Christian refugees from Syria, and they proclaimed that they would support their resettlement. And the leader of this, the head of this foundation, Miriam Shavit, she stated clearly that Muslim refugees pose a threat to Poland. And what's interesting, she herself was born to a Polish mother and a Syrian father, a pastor of Presbyterian Church in Warsaw. In response to all this context, all this situation and this polarized society I have been describing, there was a number of grassroots initiatives. So I would like to talk about this, mostly in my presentation, to talk about responses to this polarization. And because for some believers, the refugee crisis became the moment of mobilization. So at the moment when they wanted to take action. And let me describe very shortly our research that we were conducting. So actually the research in Poland was conducted not only by me, but also by the other two researchers present here. And it was interviews, participatory observation, but also we followed the online discussions and media discussions. And we focus our research on the organizations, civil service organizations, and various different groups which acted in support of refugees. So just to give you some of the voices of those people we talked to, one of the voices was that you can see in the media what the situation is like. It's far from ideal. We wish there was far more openness and hospitality. And it hurt us that it's not the case. We also have a sense of my own personal defeat. So some Catholics decided to object and to reject to this situation of indifference in two ways. So they were either assisting refugees or trying to educate society to change the attitudes. So it went two ways. And many people refer to religion and to religious value as their motivation. So here you see a quote again. Personally, I am motivated by my religion. I believe that refugees and migrants deserve respect. I am convinced that every human being, no matter where they come from, has inborn dignity. To continue, during the interviews, we came across many statements when people were referring to such values as building bridges and not walls. So they called you can read the quote, they were referring to being open, to build dialogue, to build cooperation. They saw also the church that it should be, by definition, a universal church, so not closing, but open to other visions. It also, people also explicitly stated that there should be openness to followers of other religions, and focusing on the things that unite people and not divide them on common things and common good. And one of the examples of such initiatives is communities of refuge. It is an initiative that was created by several groups. Sant Edigio, the Catholic Intelligentsia Clubs, the Refugee PL, and Polish Migration Forum. And what they did, they organized an educational program for parishes and congregations, religious seminaries, and various faith groups. And the program was especially intense in 2017 and 2018. But they also still continue to organize support and inform about the pro-refugee, Catholic, and interfaith activities. So what they did, they prepared also a leaflet for parishes, and they were trying to organize the support around number of actions, such as educating about church position on refugees as people in need who need support. But also they organized meetings with refugees and migrants to make the distance smaller. They especially stressed the need to develop the language of respect, to welcome migrants and refugees, and also to organize direct support in various ways. Another initiative I would like to mention was organized in Poznan. It was called Salam in Our Neighborhood, and it was a meeting that was described that the goal was to organize a meeting of people of different cultures, religions, and generations. So it was not only focused around religion, but also about other factors that might divide people. And they saw this initiative as a opportunity to look for values that connect people. So to quote also from the leaflet, we want this project to help us, the inhabitants of Poznan, to appreciate the value of cultural diversity, which lies at the basis of our society, and to get to know the culture, tradition, and heritage of other religions, and especially of Islam. So this initiative was strongly connected to the Muslim Culture and Educational Center in Poznan. And this is the center run by Imam Yusuf Hadid, and you can also read the quote here where he says that he, just with this project, but also with his other activities, he wants people to learn to respect the Muslims. So it's about the respect for children, for people, about the people who are living in Poznan sometimes for years or decades, and about dignity. So he himself experienced, on the one hand, that there were many initiatives carried out by the center, also with support of other institutions and NGO organizations, or even the municipality. But also the situation was that there were various forms of intolerance, abuse experienced by Muslims in Poland. While the programs I was describing were more directed towards like larger society, and their goal was to change the attitudes and to also learn about the other, there were also many initiatives that had more ecumenical character. So these ecumenical initiatives, or they could be also called interfaith initiatives, some of them took place in Poland already before the refugee crisis, but the refugee crisis was important because it focused the attention more on refugees and their situations. So, for example, in 2018, there were materials prepared for this World Migrant and Refugee Day, and these materials suggested that people could be active in various ways. So they proposed that lay people in the Catholic Church could get involved in a number of initiatives. And I think this quote is really interesting because it mentions not only that there should be like prayers organized for the I'm sorry, I need to, it's a bit multitasking. There should be prayers organized in the intention of refugees and asylum seekers, but also they suggested that the refugees should be supported, especially in the Middle East, which leads me to a very interesting point. I think that there was always a certain discussion if refugees are not accepted to Poland, maybe they should be supported in the countries of conflict or in the transit countries. And of course, this idea was welcomed by some, but by some Catholics was not acceptable because it was seen as also a kind of neglect. Yes, that yes, we help, but we don't help in Poland, we help in other countries. It's also, I think you don't see my presentation and you see this. So we need to, I'm sorry about these technical difficulties. Also in this leaflet, it was mentioned that there are immigrants from Ukraine, and this became a big topic in Poland, especially in the last 4 or 5 years, where a large number of Ukrainians came as economic migrants, but also some of them experienced difficulties. So there was this attempt to reach out also to other groups that are in the need of support, and also people staying in the reception centers for foreigners. So these are the centers where people are waiting for the outcome of their asylum procedure, and these are often people from Chechnya, but also Somali, Iraqis, or Pakistanis. Just shortly, the Catholic Church was also organizing the Day of Islam, which was approved by the Common Council of Catholics and Muslims in Poland, and it was taking place throughout the country. So it was also a way to make to change the attitudes towards Muslims and to make cooperation possible. Okay, and here you can see a picture, a print screen actually from a web page of Archdiocese from Łódź, so that's central Poland, and it's about the ecumenical prayer that was organized for refugees in 2015, and it was led by the clergy of the Polish Reformed Church, the largest Lutheran church, the Evangelical Church of Augsburg Confession, the Polish Catholic Church, the Orthodox Church, and the Roman Catholic Church. So 5 denominations were present there. So it's also an example of this kind of involvement that was trying to give the example of how Catholics and other Christians could get involved. And during this celebration, they also referred to the story of the Good Samaritan, and they called for compassion. And this leads me to another point that I will not have really time to explore further, but it's the question of what is the value of religion in integration. And we came across very different attitudes to this question. So one example of the attitude is this Chechen woman who, when she was asked if she plans to move to Germany from Poland, as many Chechen refugees did, she replied that she feels better in Poland because she said that people believe in God here, and she believes in God, so it's better for her to stay. And also the family is an important value in Poland, like it is in Chechen culture. So her example shows that this religion and the value of religion and family was crucial for her as a part of her integration into Polish society, but also for other migrants and refugees, religion was rather a dividing factor. Maybe we can go more into this during the discussion. So I'm continuing to my conclusion. You can see that there was really a very divided spectrum of proclamations, activities, and inactivities among clergy and lay people in Poland, and various religious groups and organizations were engaging in different kinds of activities to support refugees and asylum seekers, but also most of those activities were actually aiming to change the attitudes towards refugees as well as towards Muslim, as a way to live religion and to relate to religious values. And finally, that those interfaith and ecumenical initiatives that took place during refugees crisis, they mostly were in support of refugees, and they call for spiritual and practical support for them. So thank you for your attention, and I give the voice to Elżbieta.
Thank you, Izabella. Just very briefly in between, so this session is now being recorded, as some of you might have seen. This will not be the case for the discussion. Be aware that this session is recorded. It might also be that your screen or the things that you put in the chat during the presentations is somehow visible. I don't know. If you have questions, you can already put them in the chat. Elżbieta, the floor is yours.
Thank you. So let's move south a little bit to Hungary, which was one of the countries where we did field research. Actually, some of the research I had done prior to the project, right after the arrival of refugees in 2015 and then 2016, when I was there on a different, for a different reason. But the thing that I want to emphasize that unlike Poland, that didn't really see an arrival of any sizable refugee population, certainly not from the Middle East, during the so-called refugee crisis, well, Hungary for a minute saw a large group, and I'll talk about it in a second. But when we did the research, we saw a lot of contradictions. So let me point out, yes.
Could you introduce yourself very briefly, maybe before you start with the substance?
Oh, I see. Well, I'm Elżbieta Goździak. I'm like the Izabellas, I am an anthropologist by training, but my claim to fame is that I too am a forced migrant from way back when. So in my research, I always emphasize refugee participation, capital P. Okay. So contradictions. So let me point out to some of them. As you know, Orban constantly amends the constitution, but the latest constitution is the 2012 constitution, and it refers to a Christianity or a Christian heritage and emphasizes the role of Christianity in preserving nationhood, while totally disregarding the country's secular heritage. For that reason and for other reasons, it was a subject of great controversy. So on one hand, the Hungarian constitution prohibits religious discrimination and speech violating the dignity of any religious community, and stipulates the autonomy of religious communities. However, when you look at some events and how the courts dealt with them, for example, in December of 2018, the Hungarian parliament amended the constitution and stripped hundreds of religious entities of their social status. This amendment went into full force the following year in April and established a kind of a funky four-tier system of churches that are eligible for tax deductions from donations and moreover eligible for state funding. So as the crisis was unfolding, when you started looking at who was there to provide help or not provide help, this point was very important. The amended constitution also was viewed by many as a serious restriction on religious freedom, as people could not exercise their rights unless they belonged to one of the congregations stipulated in the four-tier system. So any, newly developing evangelical, for example, congregation or something like that, was not at the table. Among the many objections was the issue was raised that the Christian ideology was sort of forced, down the throat of the whole society. So again, in May 2018, you can move, please, next slide. So in May 2018, for example, the Supreme Court deemed that the government's raid on the Church of Scientology was a lawful thing. So on one hand, you have that, faith communities should exist in peace and quiet. On the other hand, here the government raids it. For those of you who are interested, in the sort of the history of Jews in Hungary, there is a new museum called the House of Faiths that is being built, and that is huge controversy even amongst the different Jewish congregations, because the feeling is that the way it is planned, it would obscure the country's role in the Holocaust. People, of course, also objected, many civil society leaders objected to the government officials' praise for World War II era anti-Semites and Hitler allies. Next, please. Next slide, please. Okay, so as I said, almost 400,000 asylum seekers crossed the Serbian-Hungarian border. So that's a large number of people, in a country that is small. The majority were Muslim, and I have posited from the very beginning that if the refugees were much more diverse in terms of religious backgrounds, perhaps we would not have these heated anti-refugee debates. Also, if they were white, because for those of you who are as old as I am, you remember that when the Bosnians came to Hungary, they were welcome. They were Muslim, but they were white, and they were from the former Soviet bloc, so different affinities and that sort of thing. But certainly, as I said, the refugees were there for a minute because most of them treated Hungary as a transit country. And even those who originally thought that perhaps they could settle there, in a few days realized that this is not a welcoming country. So therefore, the question is, was it really a crisis if you were hosting people for, literally hours? Next, please. So despite the short duration of the refugees being there, the government and the government-sponsored media really called this a Muslim invasion and a threat to Christian identity of Hungary and possibly the whole European continent. Oftentimes refugees were equated with terrorists and that they would obviously have very negative effects on European culture, that they would pose a threat to European women, but mostly that, their values are incompatible with values of the European continent, religious and otherwise. So what was being emphasized that they come from majority Muslim countries, and that Islam is a way of life. It's not a religion that is relegated to Friday, the same way that Christianity is maybe relegated to Sundays. And the whole discourse became very politicized. Next, please. The contradiction or the interesting point is also that when you look at Orban's his own political career, well, he was an atheist or proclaimed himself to be an atheist, and his emphasis of religious values is quite a new thing, which fits really well with his nationalistic viewpoints and with the illiberal democracy and the defense of European values. But there is also a huge connection between religion and politics in Hungary, especially like the Hungarian Evangelical Brotherhood, which is very much the sort of anti-government and dissident, if you will, body or congregation that has started with also this Beszélo, which is a periodical that critiqued way before the crisis, critiqued what was happening politically in the country. There are obviously, like in Poland, the same thing, that the society is divided, and some called for welcoming the stranger, love your brother like yourself, using biblical quotes and that sort of thing. There is some evidence of ecumenical collaboration and a mixture of religious and maybe I would put predominantly secular values in all the volunteer efforts that we looked at. There is the same attitude as in Poland, that we must defend Christianity in the Middle East, and the Orban's government actually established a special office in the parliament, at the parliament level, that is supporting financially some risky things, because when Isa and I were interviewing people in Budapest from that office, they were, for example, supporting rebuilding certain villages in Syria while the bombs were still flying. And so we asked, what about the durable solution of return, but only when it is safe to return? It didn't seem safe at the time. Next, please. Hungary is not as Catholic as Poland, but numerically, Catholics outnumber all the religions. So you have a whole slew of quotes from our interviews where you have where they show polarization and of views. The guy in the picture is Bishop Bear, who we had the privilege of meeting and interviewing, and he was one of the high-ranking clergy that wanted to show by example the response, the positive response to Pope Francis's call of welcoming the stranger, and he welcomed in his own rectory several refugees. He hoped that by that example, his congregation and other clergy would respond in the same way. However, he was very disappointed and he almost shed a tear in the interview with us, because he said, this really didn't work at all. So all in all, because of all these anti-refugee sentiments, there were really very few people that were granted some sort of either refugee or protected, usually temporary status. Some of them were, I met, for example, some of them in Bicske, in a refugee camp outside Budapest that no longer exists, who were from Cuba. So not part of the summer of 2015 refugee crisis. Next, please. So here you can see, I'm not going to show the video, but you can Google it. But here is Miklos Bear with Tamas Fabini, who is a Lutheran bishop, and they're at the request of UNHCR, actually, they recorded a video in Hungarian, but with subtitles in English, kind of appealing to the Christian community in all over the world to welcome Muslim refugees and that sort of thing. It's quite powerful. And they said things like, Pope Francis said that refugees are our brothers. In the Bible, Jesus said, when I was a refugee myself, you took me in. You cannot understand this message in any other way. And, they both said, well, if we are supposed to be Christian, how are we supposed to show that we are Christians? We should be welcoming people. That's one of the tenets of Christianity. Next, please. Next slide. No, yeah, okay. Okay. All right. Here you have a whole slew, and I'm not going to go through all of this, but again, just like Izabella showed in Poland, amongst the clergy, amongst of different Christian denominations, there were a few people who were pro refugees and pro immigration, but many were anti, and several sat on the fence, because they were also saying that, well, refugees is really not a religion thing. Admissions of refugees and facilitating integration of refugees is the government's job. So we, as members of congregations or churches, we're washing off our hands. Okay, next, please. Many also launched a very staunch anti-Muslim campaigns. So it was beyond the, sitting on the fence, and repeated the same kind of phraseology, if you will, that the state-sponsored media were using, invaders, Islamists, that sort of thing. They went as far as criticizing the Pope and saying that the Pope is wrong to call for compassion, and that moreover, the Pope does not understand the local context, so he should butt out of that. Well, the interesting part was, and the commentary from some of the Catholics that we interviewed was, well, allegedly we are one Catholic, Holy Catholic and Apostolic Church, right? So universal church. So there is no local context necessarily. So, the worst part, the worst example was the Bishop of Kaposvár, who published a letter, titled "The Evening News from the European Caliphate in the First Century After Christianity," and painted this really horrible picture of what's going to happen to Europe if we admit refugees. Okay, yeah, go to the next, please. Okay, so in all of this, the allegedly Christian and focused on these Christian values, government provided no assistance to the incoming refugees. Moreover, put a lot of restrictions on what could and couldn't be done. So those of you who are on Facebook, you should look at the Facebook page called Budapest Scene, because the government explicitly forbid journalists and photojournalists to post pictures and interview families with children or to show children. And Budapest Scene did a photo journal, if you will, over the whole summer of 2015 to actually show how diverse the group of refugees were. There was limited response from the official NGOs. So some of the ones that were active was the Magyar Ecumenikus, which it's an interesting, it's an evangelical group that provided a lot of assistance, especially at the border, and worked very closely with UNHCR, in this sort of no man's zone at the border, that they could leave supplies and all of that. When I was interviewing them in 2016, even Orban's wife volunteered for them. So allegedly, supported by the government. The Evangelical Brotherhood that I already mentioned is the renegade group, but they have been very active in kind of responding on the fly to many things. We interviewed the head of that church, and he was saying, when the refugees started arriving at Keleti, he noticed that there were no latrines. And he said, when we are talking about religious values, we're not only talking about high-valued prayer and all of that. We need to see the humanity in everybody. And so he just got on the phone and arranged for latrines, because the response from the police that was the only presence on the part of the government was, well, let them go to Austria to go to the bathroom there. So we don't want them here. We want them. The Adventists were also somewhat helpful. Although many people told us, many of the volunteers not affiliated with any organizations were saying, well, a lot of NGOs showed up in their little vests with their little logos for show, but they really didn't provide anything. They didn't provide any money to buy food. They didn't, pull up their sleeves and work with us. Mixo was also an interesting thing, because that was a group of students at CEU, when CEU was still in Budapest. And Mixo also had several Palestinian refugees that predated the refugee crisis. So it was a very nice group from looking from within and looking from the point of view of a refugee, what do people need? It since is dissolved when Orban criminalized assistance to criminalized people who assist refugees. The rector of CEU decided that they would dissolve it, and also that they would dissolve the program that Mixol kind of spearheaded, and that was the OLIVE program, which provided scholarships for refugees and immigrants to get a degree at CEU or learn Hungarian or whatnot. Okay. Time is nearing, Jos is telling me. So let's see if I have one more, I think. So I want to emphasize this. So the assistance that did happen, the food provided, all of that was a very spontaneous effort organized by volunteers using social media, word of mouth and that sort of thing, but not necessarily motivated by religious values. Although in our report, we said, the religious values and human kind of values were sometimes expressed explicitly, but oftentimes implicitly. And this is an example that, people showed the welcoming the stranger and all of that through actions, not through talking that I am motivated by the religion. So since Josh is telling me I should stop, I'm going to stop here. Thank you.
Thank you very much, Elżbieta.
Good afternoon, everyone.
Yes.
Welcome to the very last presentation of this first session. My name is Izabella Kujawa. I'm a PhD candidate. Thank you. I'm sorry. I'll change it later, maybe. Okay, that's fine. So once again, my name is Izabella Kujawa. I'm a PhD candidate in the field of social anthropology, and I'm also affiliated with Adam Mickiewicz University and Center for Migration Studies there, and I'm also a member of the NovaMigra team. So while obviously still staying or trying to stay focused on the topic of religion, for a couple of moments now, I would like to draw your attention to the situation of refugees based outside of the European Union. So I'd like to present or indicate some of our findings coming from our fieldwork in Turkey, in Istanbul. So as a part of the NovaMigra project, as Jos has already mentioned at the very beginning, we were very much interested in the question of norms and values. And one of the tasks planned in the project was framed as the external dimension of the value transmission. And the idea behind that was to look at the ways in which values are part of cultural orientation programs. These are programs that are organized for refugees who are in the process of resettlement to prepare them for this resettlement to the third country. So we got a chance to focus on this issue. We got a chance to conduct several interviews in 3 different countries, actually, focusing on this kind of courses. We got a chance to explore how they are planned, organized, and implemented on the ground. We also conducted some interviews with representatives of various civil society organizations working in these 3 different countries, and among them with Syrian activists and volunteers. But for today's presentation, I would like to focus on one very specific element related to the whole issue, which I found particularly important and interesting. I would like to point to imaginaries, emotions, and concerns which refugees bring with them to this kind of programs. So when I asked about this aspect, one of our interlocutors, a person responsible for carrying out this kind of courses, she immediately started laughing, and she responded with 2 words. She said, "Red doors." And then a story came. So she told me a story about the community
somewhere in Europe, which was aware of the fact that refugee families were to be resettled to their location. So this community came up with an idea, with an initiative to do something nice for them. They came up with an idea to refresh houses, which were to become new homes for the newcomers. They painted the inner walls and they painted the entrance doors. As you might already assume, they painted them red. But there was a twist to this story, because as I was told, the newcomers misunderstood the whole undertaking. They didn't recognize it as a nice welcoming gesture, as it was intended to be. Instead, they assumed it was a signal to everyone there that these are the places where refugees, the others, live. So they were scared that this was a part of some sort of strategy to stress the otherness and exclude them right from the start. What's more, as I was told, the Red Door story circulated among refugees still waiting to be resettled, and it was for many months a real headache for the educators, because every new group which came to participate in these cultural orientation programs referred to this story, and they referred to it in a very specific way. So they saw it as a sort of evidence and confirmation to the fears and concerns many of them seemed to have. So the story about the red doors became a starting point for many discussions in these courses. And of course, the educators claimed that they did their best to discuss all the issues raised so that the informed decisions about resettlement could be made. But the story and the conducted interviews indicate that many, if not the majority of the concerns, had a lot to do specifically with religion and religious tolerance, or actually a lack of it. So the teachers were asked whether in the new home countries, women will be allowed to wear headscarves, whether the kids will be forced to attend sport classes, wear any specific clothing, whether it will be possible to pray and feel safe while doing it. So the general concern was whether it was actually necessary in order to be resettled and have a peaceful, successful life to give up on one's own religion and culture. The issue or question of religion was very much there, not only for refugees waiting to be resettled, but also for those who were based in Turkey and didn't want to or couldn't leave. Since 2011, over 3.5 million Syrians were registered in Turkey. One of our interlocutors summed up shortly the initial openness by saying, people at first saw welcoming Syrians as the right thing to do. They were perceived as their Muslim brothers and sisters. And in fact, the rhetoric surrounding especially the initial phase was very much centered around the issue of religion. At the same time, however, it is impossible not to mention the fact that Syrians in Turkey are not recognized as refugees. Instead, they are placed under temporary protection, which, again, I'm quoting here from one of our interviews, was still a big improvement, giving people access to health services and education. But in the same interview, it was indicated that the situation was still far from being perfect, as there is no sense of security. Everyone is working illegally for much less than Turks, and it's simply hard to make a life. So despite the fact that the government's narration for a long time focused on stressing similarities, among them the similarity of religion, Syrians in Turkey still experience hardship, face many difficulties, and get to deal with prejudice, with negative attitudes, and sometimes extremely negative attitudes, which also get internalized by many of them. So, for instance, to Syrians I talked to admitted that they felt ashamed to be refugees, and at some occasions they even pretended to have come to Turkey from some other countries in the region. In the face of such situation, of course, various kinds of assistance and support were and obviously still are very much needed. So we tried to gain some insight into the whole field of refugee support in Turkey and tried to establish which of its aspects are maybe some sort of continuation, permanent element of the whole field, and which are new there. So for instance, one of our interlocutors indicated that the whole system of support was kind of already there, but it was used in a different context and underwent some shifts. So he said, NGOs in Turkey, no matter their profile, were always there to organize help in the case of crisis. Up until then, it meant they were needed to cope with the aftermath of earthquakes. For them, refugee crisis was something very similar, an urgent crisis, something to respond to. With time, it became a permanent crisis, something they did not expect. So some of the interviewed organizations confirmed that they in fact changed the profile of their work, and many, if not all, pointed to this notion or idea of permanent crisis, stressing the fact that while it's been already many years since the crisis, the war in Syria, there are still no future-oriented policies which would allow people to feel safer and more settled there, and the NGOs to plan their work better. So with the arrival of refugees, some organizations changed their profile, many new ones were established, and it happened along the increasing presence of foreign and international organizations, which was at first happening in a quite chaotic manner, but was later cut short, which was also related to the coup of 2016. These changes led to many different kinds of cooperation and exchanges, but also to competition, and created something called by one of the interlocutors a migration industry. With such a diverse landscape of organizations, similar variety appeared when it came to motivations to get involved in this kind of activities. They were based both in religious as well as secular realms. And of course, some people also frankly admitted that for many, it was simply a way to earn their living in a worsening economical situation in the country. Activities in many different areas to support refugees are very much needed. Among them also ideas which touch upon or specifically focus also on religion and religious plurality. But here I would like to focus on one example of an initiative taking a bit different approach. So this specific organization is based on volunteering only and does not receive any external funding. It has maybe a bit vaguely formulated mission, which is aiming to make social impact by helping disadvantaged communities in the city. So this organization cooperates very closely with many other different organizations, which leads to a creation of different opportunities for people who want to volunteer and allows them to choose areas of work which they find particularly close to them. They carry out various activities for disadvantaged kids. They organize groups to help them study. They organize different sorts of cultural and social events which circulate around various issues. They help in soup kitchens and many other places. This specific initiative consists of people from different backgrounds coming together and doing something for various marginalized groups in their surrounding. So people coming from different places, of different nationalities, speaking different languages, of different faiths, coming together to achieve goals they establish and find important. And there were many Syrians among them. One of them I got a chance to talk to, stressed how empowering it was for him to get involved in activities like this. He said that him being there was a chance to help people around him, which was obviously very important to him, but it was also a chance for him to empower himself and to escape the label of a refugee. So someone perceived as someone passive, helpless, which he felt was constantly attached to him and many others in Turkey, and probably in many, if not all other places as well. So this would be it about Turkey, and we still have, I think, 2 more slides, which are sort of sum up and recommendations coming from our field work.
Okay, so this research, as you were probably guessing, Horizon 2020 supports research that is to inform policymaking and provide advice to the European Commission and that sort of thing. So we have a whole slew of recommendations and conclusions in our report, but I want to focus here on just a couple. And that is that if you examine what policies and practices that are being promoted are there, you find out that there's quite a bit, but that they are not always enforced as rigorously as they should. So everybody knows, how the Venice Commission was looking at Hungary and Poland and slammed us and all of that, but nothing really came out of it. So our recommendation is that there should be some sort of a monitoring body that is really looking at enforcement. That the other conclusion that we came with is that refugee and immigrant integration happens not because of governments, especially national governments, but despite them. And that to me is an interesting thing, because integration, if you've worked on integration issues, not just during and since the so-called refugee crisis, you know that true integration, social, economic, cultural, you name it, happens in communities. Therefore, we are suggesting that the European Commission looks into supporting directly local governments financially, but also through technical assistance, because there are a lot of good examples in Europe and elsewhere of how integration programs facilitate interfaith dialogues and that sort of thing, but also the more implicit religious values-based or human rights values-based efforts. And the final slide, thank you. So we also, conclude that it is crucial to involve refugees and immigrants in decision-making processes in a meaningful way, not just putting somebody on an advisory, council and with a foreign-sounding name and check it off, but also in program designs and program implementation. There are, in countries of resettlement, big countries of resettlement, you have examples of refugee and immigrant-led programs, and that the European Commission ought to look into it, how to fund directly, not through the national government, not through, some white people foundation or that kind of stuff, but directly to refugee groups, because even the Global Compact on Refugees talks about refugee participation, capital P. There's a lot of criticism of that because, yes, they call for one meeting a year in New York, refugees advising the signatories of the compact. But when you hear the refugees, the 80 refugees that were invited to the last one, they were saying, well, the majority of the funds still go to some white do-gooders. We are not being funded and supported by, so our participation is not meaningful. The support should also go for both the explicit and the implicit interface dialogue. So programs that are using a combination of secular and religious values. We would want to encourage the Commission to also look at some existing educational and otherwise ecumenical dialogue programs, such as programs that promote Christian marks and understanding, because there's a huge educational and lack of knowledge gap, in that. And we thought that a lot of the anti-refugee and anti-Muslim feelings stem from ignorance. Thank you very much.